Hearing arguments today on a very important case for the White House that deals with President Trump's tariffs and his executive ability to carry them out. Today, even some of the conservative justices were asking some pretty tough questions. Chief legal correspondent Shannon Bream, whom I had the pleasure of sitting next to last night, she zipped it overnight back to the Supreme Court to be there for us this morning. Hi, Shannon.
Hey, Martha. Well, listen, the president has said this may be the biggest case ever at the Supreme Court, and there were certainly some Washington heavy hitters in the courtroom today, Secretaries Bessent and Letnick, and there were Democrats and Republicans from the House and the Senate all watching, and it boiled down to this question: do these tariffs the president has levied equate to taxes? And if so, doesn't the taxing power rest solely with Congress? There were 3 hours of heated arguments, very tough questions for both sides of the aisle, and as you said, nearly every justice expressed skepticism at some point about how the president has used these emergency powers. Justices Kavanaugh and Barrett kept returning to this question: if the plaintiffs in this case concede that the president does have the power to shut down trade altogether, why wouldn't he also have the power to do something lesser than that in imposing these tariffs? Here's Justice Kavanaugh.
Why would a rational Congress say, yeah, we're going to give the president the power to shut down trade? I mean, think about the effects, but you're admitting that power's in there.
Yeah.
But can't do a 1% tariff.
But Justice Jackson argued that Congress's intent in passing this law was more about limiting the president, not giving him even more power. Here's her take.
Congress enacted this legislation with the intent of preventing the president from having unlimited powers in this area. And you're asking us to now interpret that statute consistent with an understanding that Congress wanted to allow the president to do pretty much whatever he wanted in this area.
And Martha, by the way, there was a discussion. It came up from Justice Barrett saying, undoing this kind of thing could be sort of tricky. She said, potentially a very big mess. We wait to see what the court does. Martha.
Shannon, thank you very much. More to come on that later.
This segment covers a significant day at the U.S. Supreme Court, where the justices heard arguments about former President Trump's authority to impose tariffs. The central question before the court is whether the tariffs he set should be treated as taxes, and if so, whether only Congress has the constitutional power to approve them. The case drew widespread attention, with both Democratic and Republican lawmakers, as well as senior government officials, attending the hearing. The issue matters because it touches on the balance of power between the president and Congress. For decades, presidents have used certain emergency or trade powers to adjust tariffs, but opponents argue that these actions may go too far if they effectively create new taxes without Congress's approval. During the hearing, several conservative justices, including Justices Kavanaugh and Barrett, raised pointed questions. They noted that the challengers in the case agree the president has the authority to restrict or even block trade entirely in some circumstances. If that is allowed, they asked, why would a smaller step, such as imposing a tariff, be considered unlawful? On the other hand, Justice Jackson highlighted the original purpose of the law being discussed. She argued that Congress created it to limit, not expand, presidential power. Her concern was that interpreting the law too loosely could lead to a president having nearly unlimited control over trade policy. Throughout the nearly 3-hour session, every justice at some point showed skepticism or concern about how these presidential powers are being used. Justice Barrett even cautioned that if the court is not careful in its ruling, the outcome could create confusion and possibly broader consequences in future trade and tariff policies. The court's final decision will likely carry major implications, not only for former President Trump's past actions, but for how much authority future presidents can have in shaping trade and economic policy without first going through Congress. The ruling is expected to be closely watched across Washington and beyond.